Adventure Time is a show that premiered, surprisingly, 9 years ago, and although it is almost a decade old, having premiered almost half a year before Symbionic Titan, it remains relatively relevant. This animation giant managed to complete 283 episodes by its end last year, with multiple comics, books, and video games under its name, and yet there are still many things left to resolve, at least for people like me, who haven't read all the pages of the Adventure Time encyclopedia. For example, today's topic is one I've been thinking about, and for various reasons, I couldn't make the video, but everything aligned, and I had enough time to research the historical and cultural background of the Rainicorns, so here I am. The first thing I need to make clear, in case you hadn't deduced it before, is that this video focuses on the in-show explanation of why Lady Rainicorn speaks Korean outside of the show in the real world. In the pilot, Lady Rainicorn made noises, and for the series, they wanted her to speak a language, but one difficult for casual viewers to understand. Additionally, Pendleton Ward, the creator of the series, worked extensively with Korean animators and directors while developing Adventure Time, and the entire show was animated by studios in South Korea. So it was not surprising that the preferred language was Korean. But within the story of Adventure Time, the situations are completely different. As soon as I started my research, I noticed something strange. Despite being Jake's partner and what we would consider a character with a certain degree of importance, Lady Rainicorn only appears as a central character in 8 episodes, 9 if we want to count the animated short that started the series. So there isn't much from which we can gather information. But after watching as many episodes as I could and tirelessly and thoroughly researching on the internet, I have definitely come to the conclusion that everything we need to know is mostly in just 2 episodes of Adventure Time. The in-laws and Lady Rainicorn of the Crystal Dimension. Let's start with the in-laws and... This is the 12th episode of the 2nd season, and it shows us some of the history of the Rainicorns for the first time, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The episode shows us Lady Rainicorn's parents, who were invited by Jake to meet and ease Lady Rainicorn's nerves to introduce her family to Jake. In the first few minutes of the episode, we already get a small piece of very important information. Jake sends them a prismogram written entirely in the Korean language. This clearly indicates that they not only speak Korean, but also write it as we humans do, as well. Then, Jake explains to Finn why he is nervous. There was a huge conflict between dogs and Rainicorns in the Crystal Dimension, a war over territory that lasted thousands of years. Based on the drawing, one picture shows Lady Rainicorn's father. We can see that they included flying saucers and nuclear weapons. When Lady Rainicorn's parents arrive, they use universal translators to communicate, as they normally speak Korean. During the episode, Jake pretends to be a Rainicorn and they play many games, getting more and more hurt. Lady Rainicorn's parents think that Jake is her servant, and interestingly, at one point Bob gets upset with Finn because he apparently disrespected the Rainicorn heritage. This suggests that they have quite a history. After being angry, Jake informs guests that he will serve the food because Finn has a very good advisor. They misunderstand him and try to eat Finn, who, as a human, is considered a delicacy for the Rainicorns. With this, Jake decides to stop pretending to be a Rainicorn and saves Finn, but to everyone's surprise, Bob and Ethel are extremely happy that he is a dog. They explain that a dog had saved Bob during the war, and that is why Lady Rainicorn's family loves dogs. So we have quite a bit to review here. First, the war between dogs and Rainicorns. The most thing about this is Jake mentions it lasted thousands of years, and we can see Bob was in the war when he was younger, so it is evident the war ended recently. This brings us to a problem that links with Lady Rainicorn's Korean. The Mushroom War happened 1,000 years before the events of the series. If Jake is telling the truth, probably, the war had been going on since before the apocalypse. And yes, it is possible that they are dog years, but in the series 1 dog year is only 2 human years, and for it to be thousands of years, I think it should be more than 2,000. That the war existed before the apocalypse, is indirectly supported by Bob when he talks about the Rainicorn heritage, making it seem that the Rainicorns lived in a community with a culture for at least centuries. In other words, Rainicorns and humanity existed at the same time. Based on what we have learned, we already know that humans and Rainicorns lived in the same era, although in different dimensions, and it is most likely that Rainicorns absorbed Korean culture in one way or another. We have another episode, Lady Rainicorn of the Crystal Dimension, where Lady Rainicorn returns to her dimension. In this episode, Tivy finds a strange box with a glass sandwich inside a drawer in Lady Rainicorn's kitchen. Tivy eats the sandwich and takes the box to a market to see if he can sell it, and Lady Rainicorn discovers this and runs out to catch up with Tivy. Tivy fails to sell the box, but he meets Lee, a Rainicorn on a flying motorcycle who offers to take him to a place where there is some money, which turns out to be a mansion within the Crystal Dimension. Once in the Crystal Dimension, he starts looking for Lee and Tivy. Here is where the episode jumps to a flashback that explains many things. It turns out that in the past, Lady Rainicorn had been dating Lee, who hated dogs, and during an attack by Lee on a military dog facility known as the Maze, she decides that Lee has gone too far and steals what he wanted to take from the Maze, the Crystal Sandwich, which he apparently wanted to use to wipe out the dogs from the Crystal Dimension. Lady Rainicorn escapes the Crystal Dimension and hides on the farm that would later become her home. The episode ends back in the present, with Tivy trapping Lee inside the sandwich, leaving him in the box, and the puppy deciding to stay in the Crystal Dimension to live with his grandparents. This episode tells us a lot of things about the history of the Rainicorns, which, although not particularly important for today's topic, is still very interesting. Here we are shown the society of the Crystal Dimension shortly after the end of the war. In the flashbacks, we see clearly the tensions between the dogs and the Rainicorns, and it is clear that the dogs were the ones who won the conflict. We see the military complex and the dogs as police in positions of authority. In the present, it is evident that socially the Crystal Dimension is more balanced between dogs and Rainicorns, but in the flashbacks, it is very clear that the war ended recently. Something odd is that we see revolutionary dogs in the present, which indicates that not everyone is happy with how the war ended. But now, let's talk about the Korean language. So, it is evident that this language was adopted by the Rainicorns from Korea, but we still don't know when, how, or why. I started writing the script for this video with a somewhat crazy theory in mind. That theory was that in reality, the Rainicorns had not adapted Korean, but rather it was the other way around, that the Rainicorn language was adapted by humans, and that the Rainicorns would be fantastic creatures from Korean mythology, like the Chilin or Korean dragons. But after looking at the evidence, it is clear that this language was absorbed by the Rainicorns after the war. We have the fact that no mythological creature corresponds to the Rainicorns in Korea. Dragons and Kirin, which are the closest thing they have to a unicorn there, are indeed benevolent and wise creatures. This doesn't fit very well with the Rainicorns, who love to eat humans. But the biggest evidence we have is in a book titled The Enchiridion and Marcy's super secret scrapbook, which is the Enchiridion, but with memories from Marceline's past, and it's not in Spanish, sadly. Here, a very important concept is mentioned, the elasticity of a planet. According to this book, to prevent all dimensions from catastrophically colliding with each other, all particles in a specific dimension have their own specific frequency. Particles with different frequencies are in different dimensions, and adjusting this frequency enables interdimensional travel. Elasticity is a property of each dimension that determines how easy it is to change the frequency of the particles in that dimension. Thus, the more elastic a dimension is, the easier it will be to open a portal. In the time of the dinosaurs, the Earth's dimension was quite elastic, but it became more rigid as time went on. But when the nuclear bomb that ended the war detonated, the biggest bomb of all, the elasticity of this dimension increased excessively, and this allowed many creatures from other dimensions to enter through portals spontaneously created by this change in elasticity. This is where the Rainicorns enter the land, not before, because the bomb was what allowed the arrival of all these beings from other dimensions. So, the Earth had just been devastated by a nuclear war, and the war between the rainicorns and the dogs was ongoing. It is almost certain that the portal through which the rainicorns entered was in Korea, and this is why they absorbed so much Korean culture, not just the language. We see Jake cooking Korean dishes Lady Rainicorn taught him, and in the crystal dimension, they have many elements of human life, including houses, cars, motorcycles, shops, and a sense of fashion. We also know that Didiocorns can sustain themselves quite well with very little food, and that would explain how they could stay alive with such a small population of humans. We can certainly take it a step further and come to understand that dogs like Jake are from another dimension, and also recognize that dogs in our dimension are actually a different species. We also know that the dogs absorbed the English language, and that later on some rainicorns would also learn the language, although they are a very small minority. In conclusion, it is evident that the rainicorns adopted many cultural elements from the place where their portal opened, Korea, shortly after the end of the nuclear war, and the most important of these elements was the Korean language, which 1,000 years later became a central part of this species' culture. So I really hope you enjoyed this really long video, even though I went on a bit. The truth is I wanted to talk about how strange and unclear the story of the rainicorns is, and it was a good idea to start with one of the most obvious mysteries in Adventure Time to talk about something I find super interesting. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more videos like this, and see you in a few days in a new video. Viewers.